Every time this man kills someone, he brings an apple. Then, he calmly opens the girl's refrigerator and chooses a bottle of beer he likes. He even petted the cat she raised. When the girl finished showering was his favorite time. Surely even the police would be crazy to imagine that a murderer with such cruel methods was just a cleaning staff. Joe looks elegant and polite on the outside, but he is the one who makes women in the whole city tremble in fear. He is a serial killer. He will attack the women he is interested in with the most cruel methods. Joe will confidently walk into the house of the target he has chosen and open a cold bottle of beer first, then eat some pizza to relieve his fatigue. He also lies on the target's bed, eats an apple, and reads the newspaper. The newspaper commented on the famous serial killer in the past 2 years. He used his unique method to kill 4 young women in a row. Then Joe will pet the cat and wait for the girl to come out of the shower. Joe likes to harm people, but he loves cats very much. After Joe finishes everything, he carefully cleans the victim's house to remove all traces of himself. The car Joe stole must also be cleaned up. Finally, he will pick a beautiful rose as a reward for himself. The reason Joe attacked this woman is very simple. He saw the woman smiling at him in the supermarket, but in fact, the girl smiled at the person behind Joe. For Joe, the woman he likes can only die and cannot be taken advantage of by others. When Joe returned home and heard his mother's voice message, his good mood suddenly disappeared. He had a mother who was always controlling, strict, and nagging. He could only vent his resentment towards his mother on other women. This was the underlying reason why Joe liked to kill women. Joe was just an ordinary person. He wouldn't do it for trivial or impulsive reasons. For him, this was just a hobby. He liked women who liked to do things they didn't like. He liked to carry his toolbox. He walked or took the bus so that he wouldn't leave any traces and could conveniently find the next lucky girl. Under his mother's constant urging, he reluctantly went to her house to eat. Before entering the house, he threw the beer bottle he drank at the victim's house into the trash can and threw the stolen car keys in there. After throwing away all the evidence, he went to the door. When his mother saw him, she slapped him without hesitation. This was his mother's way of educating him. If there was even the slightest displeasure, she would beat and scold him. Joe could only force a smile and give his mother a rose. Seeing his mother pricked by a thorn, he felt much better. He gave his mother a bag of apples that she liked to eat the most. Then his mother let him into the house. The rice his mother cooked was cold and hard to eat. Even flies didn't like the taste. The purpose of his mother calling him to eat was to scold him and also to ask for money. Joe also had to pretend that he was very happy. In order to get revenge on his mother, Joe immediately took away a piece of his mother's puzzle so that she would never be able to put it together. An extremely childish act of revenge compared to a savage murderer. On TV, the news was showing the murder case of this serial killer who had killed 6 women. Joe looked at his masterpiece and felt very pleased, because the number of people who died at his hands was not just 6. There were also several women rotting in the trunk of the car that police did not know about. The police were alerted and arrived at the scene. The victim was tied up and naked on the bed. The body of her cat was also neatly placed next to her. A eaten apple core was stuffed into the victim's throat. The cause of her death was suffocation from the apple core. Joe's murder weapon and method were different each time, but the common point was to stuff the apple core he had eaten into the victim's throat. Such a unique and ostentatious method earned him a nickname. The police called this serial killer the Sculptor. The media called him Carver. But this time, the Carver did not just attack one person. The police also found an old woman in the trunk at the door. The old woman was the owner of the car. The Carver used a gun to kill her and then stole her car. The previous victims all died from beatings, stabbings, or suffocation. But now the Carver had a gun. His criminal methods were gradually escalating. Joe, like most men, loved to look at beautiful women. In his eyes, every woman had her own beauty. While enjoying the beauty, he was also looking for the next target. Of course, Joe had his own love. Joe had been eyeing this prostitute for months. She was beautiful and kind. Her smile was like an angel that melted Joe's heart. Joe quietly watched this girl every day. He followed her life. In Joe's eyes, the two of them had a good start. Joe wanted to know if she lived alone. Did she like cats? Could she take care of herself? The only way to find out was to sneak into her house. This beautiful girl named Laura lives alone. His next wish is to get to know her and build a good friendship. But why can't the police catch him? The reason is because he is a janitor at the police station. After Joe attacked his first victim, he was also worried and scared, so he attacked the janitor at the police station and took his place. This is the only man Joe attacked. The police will not pay attention to a small, low-class janitor. Joe took advantage of the cleaning job to freely enter and exit the office classroom. He heard every step of the police investigation. Joe knew how much information the police knew about him and what clues and evidence the police had. He knew everything. Then he checked, supplemented, and patched the holes. So the police have not gained anything for 2 years. Currently, the police only have one clue. The car owner's family said that the car key was attached to a special keychain. chain. The police certainly did not expect that it had been thrown in a trash can dozens of kilometers away. The forensic examination proved that the young woman had died of suffocation but had not been sexually assaulted. The acid in the apple core destroyed DNA and there were no clues. It seemed that this was another cold case. Sally, another janitor, liked Joe very much, but she was not his type. Sally brought Joe lunch every day. She was a kind girl, but Joe already had Laura in his heart. The next day, Joe arrived at the police station on time for work, but he found all the police officers were discussing something tensely in the conference room. He pressed his ear to the air vent to eavesdrop on the police officers' conversation. At this moment, a young woman named X was murdered. X was chained to death and the killer left an apple at the scene. The forensic team at the crime scene only found her husband's fingerprints and DNA. Chief Hunter believes that this symbolic apple was the work of the sculptor, the carver. Joe immediately disagreed when he heard this because it was clear that he did not kill X, but they blamed him. Joe was very angry and decided to find the killer to prove that he did not kill this person. Joe went to the conference room to clean. On the wall were all his achievements. Only X was not killed by him. He saw X's file on the table and was about to steal it to study, but at this moment Hunter walked in. Joe wiped the table and eavesdropped on Hunter's conversation with police. The police had ruled out the victim's husband as the suspect. If the police hypothesized that there was no apple this time, would there be a copycat? But they had no other clues, so they were still at a dead end. It seemed that Joe could only take the documents and find the culprit himself. Joe carefully studied the crime scene photos, but he didn't find anything useful. It seemed that Joe could only find clues by going to X's house. But the crime scene was still sealed off by the police, so Joe couldn't go in for the time being. Joe's mother urged him to come to her house for dinner. It was still the meat pie that she had intentionally left in the refrigerator, half-cooked. It was still her who kept asking for money. Joe could only helplessly endure it. His mother complained that Puzzle was missing a piece. To find this piece, she even searched the trash can. As a result, she found a car key in the trash can. She was going to give the key to the police. Joe recognized it as the key to the car he had stolen. If his mother gave it to the police, it would be troublesome. He made an excuse that this was his company car and he had accidentally dropped the key. After enduring his mother's nagging, he was able to get key. Joe carefully cleaned the key, removing all traces, and put it in a plastic bag. But he was still worried about his mother. Joe hesitated for a moment, found a box of rat poison, and made his mother a cup of special coffee. Joe smiled and gave the coffee to his mother. Although it tasted bitter, his mother still drank it in one gulp. No more cold meatloaf, no more urgent phone calls. Joe happily took the bus home. On the way, Joe picked up an injured stray cat. He was so full of love that he immediately took the cat to the veterinary hospital. The beautiful nurse immediately operated on the cat. The cat had to be hospitalized, so the nurse and Joe exchanged contact numbers. Joe looked at the nurse's smile and was a little fascinated. He had the idea of keeping her by his side at night. Then Joe went to the supermarket to buy cat food. The cashier was engrossed in playing a game, so she ignored him. Joe had the idea of a murderer again. Luckily for him, there was a girl behind him in line who couldn't hold it in any longer and enthusiastically introduced different types of cat food to Joe. The girl was also a cat lover. Joe had a special liking for women who raised cats. At this time, he was moved and had the idea of attacking her. Such a girl could only be kept by his side. The girl's name was Melissa, who coincidentally took the same bus as Joe. The two of them talked more and more intimately, as if they had known each other for a long time. Melissa introduced herself as a reporter. Joe told Melissa that he worked at police station. Melissa curiously asked about the case that was causing a stir in public opinion. The two got on the bus and continued talking. Melissa seemed to know a lot about murder. When they arrived at the station, Joe told Melissa to be careful. Melissa immediately asked Joe to take her home and invited him in for a cup of coffee. The weather was a bit cold. Joe put his coat on Melissa, but there was something bulging in his pocket. Joe shyly took out his gun. Melissa didn't pay attention and led Joe home by a shortcut. Melissa put her arm around Joe and pulled out a gun from his belt. Melissa used the gun to force Joe to open his briefcase. There were apples, knives, tape, and wire in the briefcase. These were indeed standard items to prove that Joe was a murderer. Joe explained that this was evidence of a murderer that the police found, but Melissa didn't believe it. Melissa forced Joe to take off his pants and underwear. With a gun to his head, Joe could only obey. Melissa knew who Joe was. Melissa took out another pair of handcuffs and gave them to Joe. Joe did as Melissa asked. He handcuffed himself to the abandoned car. Melissa looked at the tools in Joe's briefcase and was very excited. Melissa didn't listen to Joe's explanation. She sat on him. Melissa used a gun to block Joe's mouth and forced him to admit that he was the carver. While studying his murder tools, Melissa told him that she saw him sneaking around X's house, so Melissa guessed that Joe was the carver. Melissa thought that it was Joe who attacked X. Then Melissa took out pliers and violently crushed Joe's penis. When Joe woke up, it was already the next day. This murderer, who terrified countless women, had lost to a woman. Not only did he have his penis cut off, but his watch was also stolen by a tramp. Joe's murder tools were also gone. Everything was taken away by Melissa. Joe was filled with hatred and swore he would cut Melissa into 1,000 pieces. Joe tried to go home. He didn't dare to call the police and couldn't go to the doctor. Sally received a phone call, so she went to Joe's house. Joe refused to let Sally call the doctor, so they could only treat themselves. Luckily, Melissa only cut off one side of him and kept the corner. Sally learned a little, so she temporarily sewed it for him. Sally was a kind girl. She cleaned Joe's room. She saw that the room was filled with news about the Carver murder case. There were also X's case photos. Although she found it strange, she didn't dare to ask more and quietly left. 2 days later, Joe woke up. The pain made him forget who saved him. Maybe it was Melissa. Maybe it was Sally. He saw the room was cleaned up and the case photos were neatly arranged, and suddenly he had a bad feeling. Maybe his caregiver had called police. He endured the pain and packed his things, preparing to escape. At this moment, there was a loud knock on the door. Could it be the police? Joe wanted to jump out the window and escape, but the pain from his wound made him unable to move. There was no other way, so Joe could only open the door. There was no one outside, only a package on the ground. When Joe opened the package, there was a phone inside. Next was his murder weapon. Joe understood that this was sent by Melissa. She knew everything about him, and she could have sent it to the police station, but she sent it here. Melissa clearly wanted to threaten Joe to do something for her. Joe saw the necklace around her neck, and then he knew that Sally was the one who saved him, but she had discovered his secret, so he planned to deal with her. On the way, he saw Laura again. If he wanted to get in touch with her, he could only wait a little longer. Joe was always worried that Sally would tell the police his secret, but Hunter didn't know anything. Hunter told Joe that Sally's father was sick, so she took a leave to take care of him. Only then did Joe breathe a sigh of relief. When Joe got off work, he went to Sally's house to prepare to eliminate the trouble. Joe was about to knock on the door when Sally came back. Joe pretended to thank her and then entered Sally's house. He said that he was robbed at night, so he was injured. The silly girl Sally also advised Joe to report to the police and recuperate well. But what Sally couldn't understand was why Joe's house had news about Carver and photos of the murder. At this time, Joe had already pulled out a knife. In Joe's current state, if he took action, he would definitely not be Sally's match. Therefore, Joe could only lie that he wanted to help Hunter solve case, so he secretly took the documents to study. She believed his lie and said that she wouldn't tell. Only then did Joe put away his knife. The naive Sally accidentally saved her life. Joe received a phone call from Melissa. Melissa was very interested in this serial killer, so she wanted to understand him better. Now, Melissa also believed that Joe did not kill X, but someone else. So Melissa gave Joe his first task, which was to sneak into X's house to investigate the true identity of Joe's imitator. When Joe returned home, he received a phone call from his mother. It turned out that she was not dead, but had severe diarrhea. Joe regretted that he had given too little rat poison. Next time, he would definitely give her the full dose. The next day, Joe went to the police station to work. Joe's main task today was to investigate the progress of X's case. Joe suppressed his pain and climbed up the ventilation shaft to eavesdrop on the police. X's husband's alibi was blown when the crime happened. He claimed that he was watching football at the stadium, but someone proved that he spent most of the time sending emails in the car. The parking lot was out of sight and very close to his house, so he had plenty of time to attack his wife and then return to the football field. That night, Joe went to X's house. The police had lifted the blockade, so he easily picked the lock and squeezed in. He pulled the curtains, sat on the victim's bed, drank beer, and searched for clues about the real killer. Joe woke up and began to recreate crime scene. He placed all the objects according to the police photos to search for clues. Joe used the killer's thoughts to deduce the criminal psychology of other killers. Unexpectedly, after rearranging them, he actually discovered something suspicious. The ballpoint pen in the photo and the ballpoint pen in X's house were not the same. X was playing a crossword puzzle at the time. The killer rushed in. She instinctively raised the ballpoint pen in her hand to defend herself. The killer snatched the ballpoint pen and threw it away. The ballpoint pen left scratches on the wall, possibly leaving the killer's fingerprints. Who could have replaced the original ballpoint pen after taking the photo? There was only one answer. That was someone who could have entered the crime scene, which meant killer was a policeman. At that moment, the light at the door turned on and someone came. Joe quickly turned off the lights in the house and hid to the side. The person who came was Hunter. Did he come so late to find his ballpoint pen? He picked up the unfinished beer bottle on the nightstand and became suspicious. He went into the bathroom to check. Joe was also ready to take action. At that moment, the policewoman called. The policewoman still suspected that X's husband was the murderer. The policewoman's call made Hunter stop searching and hurriedly return to the police station. Joe picked up the beer bottle and watched Hunter leave. On the the night X died, many policemen came here. Joe decided to let the murderer know that his actions had been known to the Carver. That way, he would be scared and reveal his weakness. Joe left X's house, but Joe did not go home, but went to Laura's house, whom he had always missed. He did not want to end the sweetness of love early, but catching someone who imitated him to protect himself was more exciting. Now, he needed to take action against Laura to increase the excitement and enhance the feeling of happiness. He picked a lock to enter the house. First, he opened the refrigerator to take out a beer to quench his thirst. Laura was very thoughtful. There was also his favorite apple on the table. According to Joe's observation, Laura must be taking a bath at this time. He sat on the bed, eating an apple, thinking that if he attacked Laura, he could lure out his imitator. Joe stared at the bathroom door, waiting for Laura to come out. At this moment, the door opened, but the person who came out was a man. Joe used a beer bottle to hit the man on the head. When he cried out in pain, Joe ran away. At this time, Joe's wound was still very painful, so he was definitely no match for this man. Joe had just run out of the house when the police appeared outside again. It seemed that they had discovered the car he had robbed. Being sandwiched between the two sides, Joe could only hide behind the car. When the man went to report to the police, Joe hurriedly ran away. Luckily, he was familiar with terrain here, so he avoided being chased by the police. Joe was struggling to drive when a car suddenly stopped. The driver was the beautiful Melissa. Melissa did not let Joe get in the car, but told him to hide in the car. Melissa drove like a rocket while the music was playing. Joe was in pain because his wound had not yet healed. A large force of police rushed to Laura's house. The bitten apple on the nightstand, although it could not be tested for DNA, could be compared to the bite mark of the Carver before. The man was Laura's friend. Laura had gone to Bali, so he was staying at her house temporarily. The man was so panicked that he could not see the Carver's face clearly. He could only be described as a white man of average build, wearing a baseball cap. Melissa took Joe to the place where she had tortured him before. This was indeed Joe's most painful memory. Joe told Melissa that his imitator might be a policeman. Melissa was very excited when she heard this because this was worth challenge. Unexpectedly, besides the two perverts, Melissa and Joe, there was a third pervert. Melissa gave Joe 24 hours to find this person, or she would send the evidence to the police. Laura said that she also decided to go on a surprise trip, which meant that the Carver had a job and didn't have time to follow her all day. He didn't see her go to the airport. The man remembered a very important clue. The Carver always carried a briefcase. After Joe heard this, he quickly hid the briefcase. Thinking back, everyone knew that he carried the briefcase home from work. Suddenly, not carrying it would arouse suspicion. Joe was cleaning up when the muscular guy came to the police station to assist in the investigation. Joe quickly sat down to avoid being seen. All of this was caused by Melissa. Joe secretly used the police station's computer to find her real identity, but he couldn't find her. The police thought Joe was secretly watching a movie on the computer, so they didn't pay attention. No matter which policeman Joe looked at, they looked like someone who was imitating him in committing a crime. Joe had less than 24 hours left, so he had to act quickly. The police who arrived at the scene had to take attendance at the scene. Joe took advantage of the moment when he brought Hunter coffee and wanted to take a look when the policewoman walked in. They checked the location of X's husband's phone. While watching the game, he was indeed in the parking lot and didn't leave. The suspicion that the husband was the murderer was once again ruled out. When Hunter left, Joe quickly stole the police attendance sheet. Joe wanted to photocopy the attendance sheet, but he didn't know how to use a photocopier. Kind-hearted Sally wanted to help Joe, but he yelled at her. Sally thought that Joe's stitches had come loose, making him feel bad, so she intended to leave sadly amidst the yelling. Joe recalled the crime scene investigation process and eliminated each suspect police officer. First, he could eliminate the photographer because he wouldn't take pictures of his own evidence. Next, he could eliminate the fat police officer. He was also panting upstairs, so he couldn't have done it. The police officer who couldn't have done it could also be eliminated, so there were only 3 people left, including Hunter. Hunter always thought that the victim's husband was the murderer, so he couldn't have imitated Joe, so there were only 2 suspects left. Joe sneaked into the storage room to look for information on these 2 people. One was the grumpy police officer, the other was the bearded police officer. Joe hoped they wouldn't be home tonight, so he could easily enter their homes to look for evidence. Joe overheard the bearded guy's conversation and knew that he was going on a date tonight, so Joe would start from his house tonight. Joe thought for a while and then decided to follow the bearded guy first to see what he was doing. Hunter saw him sneaking around in front of a house as if he was scouting the terrain. Joe broke into the house and took out a knife from the toolbox and checked everywhere. There was a noise in the room. Joe carefully crept in. He opened the door and was surprised to see a hot scene. The bearded guy was gay. That way, he could be cleared of suspicion. Gays wouldn't be interested in women. That evening, Joe told Melissa what he had discovered. While chatting, Joe wanted to find out her identity identity and why Joe's imitator was so important to her. But Melissa didn't fall for it. Melissa pointed out the flaw in Joe's reasoning. Perverted women are even scarier. Therefore, the policewoman could also be Joe's imitator. The bearded man likes men, but that doesn't mean he doesn't like women. Hunter might be trying to frame the victim's husband. The tough policeman has not been eliminated from suspicion. Considering the difficulty, Melissa gave Joe another 24 hours. Joe hated Melissa very much, but he couldn't do anything. Joe decided to find another woman to relieve his emotions. Normal women are very wary of perverts nowadays. Joe could only change his target to prostitutes. Joe easily found one for himself, and he took her to X's house. When she saw the villa, the girl thought she had met a rich man. She immediately knelt down and prepared to serve him wholeheartedly. With Joe's current physical condition, there was nothing they could do. He could only harm people for fun. Joe opened his briefcase and found it full of weapons. The girl knew she was on the wrong boat at first sight. She quickly took out pepper spray from her bag, but Joe dropped it. Not long after, Joe strangled her to death. Now he was in a better mood. Then he dragged the girl into his car and set it on fire. Then he left X's house. The police received a report that a prostitute's charred body was found in front of Z's house. The autopsy showed that she was strangled and then burned. The bizarre case gave the police a headache. They complained that the carver kept doing nothing on working days. He kept choosing days off and taking up their rest time. They met to analyze the case, but Joe did not collect any useful information. Joe continued his cleaning job. The girls who worked with the victim were brought to the police station to assist in the investigation. They passed by, but Joe completely ignored this person. The beautiful girl named Alice knew Hunter and took the initiative to greet him. Hunter also chatted enthusiastically with Alice. When Joe saw this scene, he immediately became suspicious. Why was a policeman so close to prostitutes? Could it be that Hunter was really the one who imitated Joe to commit the crime? Joe decided to find Alice to ask clearly. This time he did not bring his briefcase. Now his identity was just an ordinary customer. Joe stole a car to the neighborhood where prostitutes often went. Joe quickly found Alice. He took out $100 New Zealand to make her dizzy. But Joe did not know that police had sent people to monitor these prostitutes for a long time. The fat policeman took continuous photos. He recognized it as Joe, a cleaner. The fat policeman felt something was wrong, so he wanted to call Hunter to report. Suddenly, someone knocked on the car window. He turned around and saw a beautiful blonde girl. Joe and Alice went to a hotel. Joe didn't want to do anything today. He just wanted to find some clues. Joe said he wanted to talk to Alice and didn't want to do anything else. Alice understood that many customers talked about how unhappy their marriages were, so they went out to have fun. She listened so much that she was about to become a psychologist. Joe asked Alice if there were any police among the customers. Alice told Joe that the police often came here. Although they didn't say their identities or names like professionals, she could smell the police. Moreover, these policemen were all very rude and perverted because they knew that even if they were arrested for this crime, they wouldn't care. But Hunter never called for help. He only helped Alice. Joe knew he had misunderstood Hunter. Hunter was indeed not someone who imitated Joe to commit crimes. Alice said there was a perverted policeman who liked to tie people up and almost choked her to death. Joe took out another wad of money. Alice described the policeman as a white man in his 30s with black hair and blue eyes. Alice didn't give any more information. Joe and Alice got into the car, but a car was following them. Joe took Alice home. Alice told Joe that maybe they should talk to the hotel manager. She was hosting a lot of guests who might know something. Joe looked at Alice's back and was very grateful for her help. But Alice knew Hunter, and she had seen Joe's face. In order not to be discovered, Joe could only attack Alice. Joe tried to put Alice in the trunk, but when he opened it, he saw the fat policeman's body. The car lights came on. The person who followed Joe and attacked the fat policeman was Melissa. Melissa didn't say anything and drove away. It's true that two perverts working together are scarier than one pervert. But Joe also knew that this time he was done for. If the policeman died, it would be a big problem. Joe blamed Melissa for causing trouble. Melissa said she was helping Joe clean up the mess. All the photos of Joe's dealings with Alice were deleted. Joe also wanted to throw these two things away where no one could find them, but his car ran out of gas. Joe struggled to push the car to fill up with gas. Joe hated Melissa to the bone. Dealing with one was tiring enough. Now he had to deal with two. Joe struggled to push the car to the gas station when he unexpectedly ran into a friend of his father's. Joe just wanted him to go away, but a police car came. Joe looked at the gas meter and was very worried. The old man next to him kept jumping. The police in the car occasionally looked at Joe. Joe struggled to fill up the gas, but the old man saw blood stains on the trunk. Fortunately, the old man thought it was rust. Joe quickly stepped on the gas and drove away from the gas station. Joe was indeed a person who loved animals. Joe did not rush to dispose of the body, but went to the veterinary hospital. Joe went to the veterinary hospital to pick up the injured stray cat. On the way, Joe also turned off Melissa's phone call. But Joe did not know that this action would get him into trouble. Joe put the cat down, went into the house to get a shovel, and planned to dispose of the 2 bodies in the truck. As soon as he left the door, he saw that car he had stolen had been stolen. Hunter quickly called Melissa, but she turned off her phone. Joe guessed that Melissa was deliberately playing a trick on him. As a precaution, Joe had to spend the night in the park. Melissa called again to remind Joe to remember that he should never turn off his phone when a woman was angry. Melissa said she would come and handle it. She told him to go to the police station to work, but today was Saturday and he had a day off. Under Melissa's pressure, Joe had no choice but to agree. Joe thought that since he was invisible, the police wouldn't notice. As soon as Joe arrived at the police station gate, he saw countless policemen working hurriedly. Joe knew something big had happened. The car was abandoned in front of Hunter's house. This was a blatant provocation to the police. Fortunately, Melissa had cleaned up the fingerprints on the car. No one had seen who parked car there. The fat policeman's body and Alice's body were in the truck. The police camera was burned to ashes. Alice, who knew Hunter, was abandoned in front of his house. What message did the killer want to convey? At this time, the policewoman received a call from the police station. The police station had found a witness. Joe didn't know what was going on, so when the police station was empty, he started stealing photos and personal belongings of the policeman. You never know when these little things will come in handy. Joe pried open the grumpy policeman's wardrobe. Joe found out that he had been staying at a hotel recently. Apparently, they had a disagreement, so he was kicked out of the house. Joe also stole photos of him and his wife. Before the police returned, Joe had covered up all the traces. Joe was happily chatting with Sally when he suddenly saw an acquaintance, Melissa. Melissa came to the police station dressed neatly. Joe's heart couldn't help but pound. Sally saw that Joe was in a bad mood, so she told him about police finding the body. The woman from earlier was a witness who saw the murderer. She was providing information to the police to draw a sketch of the murderer. Joe could hardly breathe. Joe was worried that this woman would report him. What did she want? Joe rushed out of the police station without even changing his uniform. As soon as Joe got on the bus, Melissa followed. Joe hated that he couldn't stuff the briefcase into Melissa's mouth, so she would die. Melissa showed Joe a sketch of the murderer, a man completely different from Joe. Melissa told Joe that this was her first boyfriend. Melissa distracted the police investigation, giving Joe more time to find his imitator. This was a crazy and scary woman. Joe thought to himself that he would never make her angry again. At the same time, police also found the fat policeman's car. The forensic staff speculated from the traces that he was murdered in his car and then dumped in front of Hunter's house by another car. The murderer was either overconfident or crazy, but it was obvious that the police had no clue at the moment. Melissa disguised herself as a police officer and went to a hotel with prostitutes. Melissa gave the manager some money and asked who the policeman was that came in and out of the hotel with Alice. The manager saw that Melissa was not a real policeman, so she asked for another $100 before she would tell him. The third $100 was brought up. The manager said she had met the policeman who liked to play with ties. The fourth $100 was brought up. The manager started to identify him. She looked at the pictures Joe had stolen from the police station. When the fifth $100 was brought up, she pointed out the policeman. Joe had another bad time. His mother invited the old man he had met at the gas station to her house for dinner. Joe barely escaped the 2 men and went home. But Joe found his beloved goldfish eaten by a stray cat. Joe angrily chased the stray cat out. Just then, the veterinary hospital called Joe and said they had found the cat's owner. The cat's owner wanted to pay to take cat home. Joe's anger was unbearable. He told the nurse that the stray cat had been hit by a car again. After saying that, he smashed the phone. This was his way of venting his anger at his mother. It was his way of venting his anger at the injustice he had suffered as a child. The case had not been solved yet, so his superiors sent a female inspector to take full charge. She reassigned the work to the police officers to increase their efforts to solve the case. Melissa saw that Joe was in a bad mood, so she did not make things difficult for him. She pointed out police officer, the one the hotel manager identified as the grumpy police officer. Joe had not had time to investigate him yet. Joe needed to confirm whether the police officer was his imitator. Joe sneaked into the hotel where the policeman was staying to watch him, but Joe didn't know that the grumpy policeman suddenly appeared behind him. The policeman asked Joe why he was following him. Joe could only lie that I knew he was a good person by looking at him, so I wanted him to be my guarantor for my promotion application. But policeman didn't believe Joe's lie. Joe skipped work and went to the hotel where the other guy was staying. Sally couldn't contact Joe, so she went to his house to visit him. When Sally stitched Joe's wound, she left key. She opened the door and went into his house, but there was no one there. The house was dirty and messy. Suddenly, the stray cat broke in. Sally picked up the ticket under the bed and chased the cat out. Sally kindly cleaned the room, but found the necklace she had given Joe in the trash. Sally looked up the phone book and found out his mother's address. Sally Sally was very worried about Joe, so she went to his mother's house. Joe didn't tell his mother that he worked as a janitor at the police station, but he always lied that he was a car salesman. When Sally heard that, she didn't understand why Joe had to lie. Thinking about Joe's recent unusual behavior, Sally suddenly had doubts. At this time, Joe threatened the hotel staff to get the access card. This time, he didn't do anything but just tied her up. Joe used the policeman's card to enter the room and then used the prepared knife. Joe compared it with the knife with the policeman's fingerprints. Joe put the knife with the fingerprints in a paper tube. Then Joe put the knife without fingerprints in a plastic bag and left the room. Joe returned to the service staff and stuffed a stack of money into her hand as compensation. Then he gave her a knife so she could cut the rope herself. The hotel staff wanted to save her life so she wouldn't call the police. While cleaning, Joe secretly took the policeman's private phone number. Joe heard that the female inspector wanted to catch the carver, so she offered a reward of $250,000. The police were discussing how they would divide the money if they caught the carver. Joe despised these people so much that he sent a text message to the policeman. Then Joe hid to the side to observe the policeman's reaction. If the policeman was innocent, he would show the text message to his colleagues, but he didn't do that. He couldn't sit still. This was enough to prove that he was a copycat of Joe. He was also a smart person who immediately guessed that the text message was sent by Joe. He went into the tool room and closed the door. Joe felt something was wrong. Joe quickly threw the phone into the bucket of water. He immediately grabbed Joe and searched for the phone on Joe. But he searched Joe all over, but he couldn't find the phone. He searched everywhere, but couldn't find it. Joe explained that he never used a phone, but only used a landline. The policeman didn't believe him and called the number that had sent him the message. The phone in the bucket of water, of course, didn't ring. The policeman can leave helplessly. Melissa couldn't contact Joe either. He told her that the phone was broken by water. Melissa said that he put the phone in rice to absorb clean water. Melissa knew that Joe threw the phone into the water to deal with policemen, so she let it go. They both thought that the policeman would go to the hotel to find the manager. The manager was greedy, so she might betray them. Joe went home and did as Melissa said and put the phone in rice. At this time, his mother called. His mother took a bath with the old man and fell and had to go to the hospital. To apologize, she told him that a girl came to see him. Joe thought it was Melissa, but she acted confused. Joe didn't pay attention. He broke the hotel door lock and rushed in. Joe immediately had a bad idea. Melissa knocked the manager down and tied her up. Then, Joe took out the knife without fingerprints. Melissa silently watched Joe kill her. Joe put the murder knife in a plastic bag, and he took out the knife with the policeman's fingerprints. Joe rubbed the knife on the manager's blood and put it back in a paper tube. Both happily took the manager's fish home. Melissa knew that Joe wanted to blame the policeman for these murders. In a flash, Melissa's favorability towards Joe increased. Joe randomly found a trash can and threw the knife with fingerprints in it. He also threw the traffic ticket at home, which was left by the car that had previously hidden the body, into it. It could form a complete chain of evidence. Joe's phone was usable again. Joe sent a text message to the policeman and told him to prepare $50,000 tomorrow. If not, Joe would call the police. Then Joe turned off the phone and threw it in the trash. The next day, the police were discussing the departure of the hotel manager. Joe sent another text message to the policeman asking if he had prepared the money yet. Then Joe turned off the phone and threw it in the trash. When the policeman saw the text message, his mind was in turmoil because he didn't know who sent it. He could only be a little angry at Joe. His colleagues all looked at him strangely out of control. Joe returned to the supply room to prepare some more spices for the policeman. Sally walked in, startling Joe, causing his phone to fall to the ground. Sally felt very strange because Joe said he didn't use the phone. Joe could only lie that he had just bought it today. Sally felt that Joe was in a bad state, so she comforted him. She told him that she had gone to his mother's house. Sally also told Joe that she was going to the hospital to work as a nurse. Joe was very happy. Joe was very happy that he could finally get rid of Sally. But Sally felt that Joe was really abnormal. Next, Joe went to X's house. Joe texted the policeman. Joe gave him 30 minutes to deliver the cash to X's house. Half an hour later, the policeman arrived at X's house. Sally, who was far away, also saw this scene. As soon as the policeman entered the house, a frying pan flew straight into his face. In the policeman's pocket, there was not money, but hammer, nails, tape, and other tools. It seemed that he and Joe had the same skills. The force of the pan punch just now was not strong enough, so the policeman quickly woke up and fought with Joe. Sally outside did not know what Joe was involved in, so she got out of the car and wanted to go in to advise him. The two people in the house fought. Anyway, Joe was no match for the policeman. Joe was pressed to the ground and endured the punches. Sally arrived. Sally also raised her hand to knock on the door, but at this moment, her phone rang again. Joe took a cup and hit the policeman on the head. Sally's father had a heart attack and was taken to the hospital. She did not care what happened in the house, so she left in a hurry. Joe dragged the policeman to the second floor and tied him to a chair. Joe stuffed a traffic ticket into the policeman's hand. Joe covered his mouth. Joe was about to carry out an important plan. The next day, Joe called the police station from a public phone booth to anonymously report that he had found a bloody knife in the trash. It was most likely the murder weapon. Joe returned to the police station to work. Joe happened to meet Hunter. Joe's first plan was successful. Joe found out that no one was there, so he pried open the policeman's closet and placed the traffic ticket with his fingerprints inside. It didn't matter if the suspect's portrait was accurate or not. It didn't matter if the bite marks on the apple matched or not. The car where the body was hidden was the key. This was enough to prove that the policeman had started committing crimes a long time ago. Hunter went to the trash can, and sure enough, he found the bloody knife. The police were unable to contact the policeman. The technical department took fingerprints from the knife and proved that it was his. The police opened his closet to search and found the traffic ticket in his bag. They quickly found the car based on the ticket. They opened the trunk, and inside was a body that was no longer intact. It seemed that the policeman was the Carver, a serial killer. The task force searched the entire policeman's house and the hotel where he was staying, but could not find him. He must have heard the news and escaped. Joe and Melissa returned to X's house. The policeman was tied up for a day and a night, so he was very weak. When he heard that Joe was the serial killer that the police had been looking for 2 years, he was shocked. No one expected this person to be hiding right under the police. Under the threat of the two people, the policeman told the truth that he was actually Joe's imitator. He wanted to blame Joe for X's murder. This is a tragic and touching love story. At a party, the policeman got to know X's husband and wife. He glanced and realized that X was unhappy. During the conversation, he learned that she was physically abused by her husband. He was also punched by his wife at home. In the same situation, the two gradually lived together secretly. This house was where the two secretly met. Not long after, X met another man and wanted to leave the policeman. The two argued, and he lost control more and more. X stabbed him with a ballpoint pen. In anger, he strangled her to death. To avoid suspicion, he placed an apple next to him and blamed the Carver. When examining the scene, he remembered that the ballpoint pen was stained with his blood, so he used the ballpoint pen on his body to exchange for evidence. After hearing this, Joe showed disdain. He felt guilty after doing it. He was not a qualified murderer. Joe said, "I don't care that you did it to her. They are here because you harmed Joe." Melissa also told the reason why she became crazy. Melissa's sister was murdered by a corrupt policeman a few years ago. There was clear evidence, but they covered for each other. The police station forged evidence to make the policeman innocent. But the strange thing was that after a while, the policeman disappeared. Looking at Melissa's smile, the policeman suddenly realized that Melissa had attacked the policeman to avenge her sister. The policeman was Melissa's first prey. Since then, she has been hunting down scum disguised as policemen everywhere. She gradually became a crazy female ghost. Joe also understood that Sally initially thought he was a corrupt policeman. After Sally saw Joe's ID, she realized that he was just a janitor, so she let him go. The reason she was so obsessed with Joe's imitator was to punish the corrupt policeman. Joe politely handed the knife to Melissa. The cop was officially sent to hell. Melissa smiled with satisfaction. Then Joe burned down the house and drove the body to the suburbs. Joe disposed of the body so that the police would not find it. Joe set up Carver's escape perfectly, but Joe did not know that Sally had caused him a lot of trouble. The police found the cop's fingerprints on the traffic ticket, along with Sally's fingerprints. Sally was at Joe's house, holding the ticket to scare away the cat. Hunter understood that Sally thought she was not an accomplice of the murderer, but under what circumstances did her fingerprints get on it? Sally remembered that day when the cop met Joe, and she remembered that she used the ticket to scare away the cat. Sally was heartbroken and cried. Joe didn't know that he went to the park to date Melissa. The moment they met, they suddenly felt a warm atmosphere. These two perverts didn't understand each other, but were of the same kind. One held a gun to guard against all the time. The other recorded the other's crime to threaten each other. This was also a kind of romance, like dung beetles that couldn't be separated from each other. Since then, the two lived happily together. Other couples looked at the stars and counted the moon. This couple looked at beautiful women to choose their targets. Other couples dated under the moon. They dated in the middle of a forest of spears and seas of fire. Just when Joe thought everything had calmed down, Sally came knocking. That stupid Sally had hidden Joe's story from the police. Sally advised Joe to turn himself in. When Joe found out everything, he was completely stunned. But neither of them knew that the police had actually been watching Sally. Seeing the two arguing, Hunter immediately ordered the police to surround them. In the critical moment, Joe's murder tools were scattered everywhere. He quickly picked up the gun and restrained Sally. Joe saw Melissa in the distance, and their eyes met. In a flash, they confirmed it again. Joe pushed Sally away and pointed the gun at himself. Melissa nodded slightly in agreement. Amidst everyone's screams, Joe pulled the grass. The bullet bullet missed his vital spot and he was only slightly injured. This was just their plan B. There is no death penalty in New Zealand, and the prison conditions are very good. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching the whole video. Goodbye, and see you again.